Okay, I am obsessed with my kids' pajamas, which is why I was really excited to find Sleepy Drew, a family-owned small business where comfort meets styles for moms and their little ones. Their adorable pajamas come in 2-piece sets or zip-ups, and they're cozy, durable, and even have antibacterial properties. Designed by a mom with moms in mind, Sleepy Drew brings warmth and joy to your family's sleep routine. Visit sleepydrew.com and you can receive a 15% discount on your first order by using the code QUIETCONNECTION, all one word, at checkout. Shop now and make bedtime the best time with Sleepy Drew. Welcome to Quiet Connection, a podcast dedicated to ending the stigma around postpartum mental health. I'm Chelsea. Being a step-parent comes with its own challenges and misconceptions. My guest today, Amy, knows all about this. She's smashing the stigma by sharing her firsthand experience as a step-parent and biological parent to give us an insider's perspective and offer solidarity to others who may feel unseen in this particular realm of parenting. Here's Amy. Hello! Today I'm here with Amy. Amy, how are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much, Chelsea.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. I'm so glad. Usually either on a Monday or a Friday recording, I'm like, I'm a little fried or I'm a little tired. But to hear that you're doing great, that makes me feel good. So, Amy, I have a whole list of things about you, but I love it if my guests can sort of introduce themselves. So if you would like to tell us a little bit about who you are and who you were before you became a parent.
Okay, very good. All right, so my name is Amy. Amy Stone is my name. I am talking to you today, Chelsea, from sunny Miami, Florida. So it might not actually be. This is our rainy season, so officially it's probably a little gray outside. But, Florida is known for its sunshine. I've lived in Florida and Miami most of my adult life. So as I come to, so that's who I am today. And I run a business where I empower adults and families that are in the process. And one of the groups of people that I support that I'm really, really passionate about is step parents, because I am a parent. Got 2 kids, the last of which is very close to launching, 1 more year of high school. And before I became a parent, I was a step parent. So I've got 2 step kids. So those came before my parenting. So my first kid was my husband's 3rd kid. That's an important part of my story. Because that's like a different kind of entry level. And the crazy thing about step parenting, in my opinion, is that everyone knows somebody who is either a step kid or a step parent or has been a step parent or some variety of that. And yet, bizarrely, it is still crazily unsupported. It's like an experience where you just end up on your own. So before I was a parent, I was a step parent. And as I speak to you today, I will turn 51 in October, and I have the beautiful wisdom highlights to show it. And so that's who I am. That's where I am in this phase of life. And I'm happy to talk about all the different parts of that.
I'm excited. The wisdom highlights, I like that you framed it that way because I most certainly have them as well. I'm hiding them in my braids right now, but I think I'm just gonna let them out. I think I'm just like, I think my mom's generation was the cover them up and don't see them, and I'm just like, you know what? I went straight to white. They're not even gray. It's white.
So if I was going straight to white, I would love that. I have colored my hair since I was about 12 or 13. Like I started like messing around with the color of my hair. My natural hair color, which you can kind of see, is just this like sort of medium brown, and it tends to be not like super exciting. And so I've always colored my hair. And so I straddle both sides of the is it okay to go gray kind of thing, which is that, yes, I love it. I absolutely embrace it. And also I will probably be dyeing my hair in some version until I'm, 105. My mother-in-law is in her mid-80s, and she absolutely falls into that category of people who dyed their hair their entire midlife age, right? And so I knew her with dyed hair all the time. And then she moved to an active adult community in Florida, which is something we specialize in. You probably know that.
Yeah.
It's one thing we specialize. We're not good at a lot of things, but the active adult communities, Florida is very, very, very good at.
Yeah.
And and we would go to be with them in their community type events. And it was hilarious because, they moved there when they were 65, and you'd go and there was a sea of people who were 60, 70, 80, 90 and above. All of the women had these beautiful blonde heads of hair. And I would think, nobody thinks that anybody in this room actually has natural blonde hair. And I remember my grandmother having that crazy pinkish purple blue coif that she would do at the beauty salon. So I suppose, it was an entertaining thing. But within the last 18 months, my mother and I stopped dyeing her hair because it just got to the point where it was, perpetual, immediately. And she looks so fabulous with her white hair and she's really embracing it. But kind of like I'm saying, like the texture of her hair, she has fine hair. And when she stopped coloring it, she lost that boost in the texture. And so what's driving her crazy now is that like she likes the color, but it's like, so.
Yeah. Oh, hair. Hair. So one of the reasons that I really wanted to hear your story was because it was coming from a perspective of this duality in terms of parenting. Like you started as a step parent and then transitioned into, I guess we would call it bioparenting, but like... That
is the word that we use, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a real word, but that is what we call it, yeah.
And I think, just as you said, it's really not a topic that's talked about a whole heck of a lot. So I would love to know your journey into step parenting, like when you met your partner and how that all unfolded.
Okay, so I'm definitely going to tell you that, but I wrote this down. I want to touch on why it's important that we talk about this.
Okay.
'Cause this is like what I talk about all day. This is me climbing onto my step box, right? My soapbox. We say standing on the soapbox. It's important to talk about the experience that people are going through when it's, stigmatized or not normalized, because other people are going through similar situations who might feel alone and isolated, right? They're not, they feel, and when you feel alone and isolated and you don't hear somebody else's story, one of the ways that shows up is that it opens this and this is a visual metaphor, right? But it opens this chasm where a bunch of misinformation and yucky stuff can come into. So if nobody talks about this, you're just going to make it up, and it is a space where you can blame yourself and think you're really, really doing something wrong. And I have spent several years talking to step parents who feel like there's something wrong with their family and something wrong with their relationship. Or they're really pressuring themselves about how, and this is one of the ways it shows up, this is my first kid, but it's not my partner's first kid, and therefore my experience as a parent is somehow devalued and not good enough. And that is not actually something that I pushed myself through. And that's one of the reasons I love to talk about it, because I'm like, wow, I have this totally other perspective of this, because I was super happy. I was wrong about all of these things, by the way, but I was like, my husband knew what he was doing, and he had the proof because he had these other people, and oh my gosh, this is going to be so much better for me. That turned out to be a misunderstanding of his experience, but that was where I went through. So I didn't shame myself about that, but it was definitely a different experience, right? I remember at the first pediatrician appointment, right, that you go to with a little tiny baby. Mm-hmm. And first-time parents are often told, isolate and stay home and shelter the baby from the germs, which is a great advice. And my pediatrician was like, oh, that boat has sailed because you have these older kids that are going to bring all this stuff into your house. Let's talk about cleaning. And, so I mean, it was just a completely different experience. I met my husband. We worked in the same company. Okay. So it is, that very modern, regular thing. Like it was like we were in a similar space. Like, so you either meet your partner through like social connections or through school connections and mine was through work connections. So that was how we met. And I tell people all the time, I had broken off a serious relationship, and was in this like deeply committed, point of like, I am not dating anyone for a while. And that was great. And so, I went to happy hour with him and then he was like, okay, I don't think I want to do this. And I was like, fine. Like, I mean, it was the furthest, I wasn't like, I was like, okay, that's
Okay,
great.
cool.
See you later. And then he came back and he's like, maybe we should date. And I was like, okay. And then he's like, I'm not sure that I'm ready for a serious relationship. And I was like, also fine. I'm like totally off doing my own thing. And then we went from there. But it was, if you have kids, and anybody who's listening who has kids, his perspective was so different from mine because I was just socializing and dating, and he had already been through this, and he knew he had a different understanding of the stakes and what he was interested in doing. So I think back to that fondly, about how he was trying to like be very serious and gentle, and I was like, I don't care, happy hour,
You're like,
date,
whatever.
don't date, I don't care. I'm fine with all of it. I was in a different perspective. And then it became more serious, and then we went from there.
Throughout that process, because you're in this place of like, okay, whatever happens, I guess.
Yeah.
When and how was the subject of his kids brought up, and how was that received?
Okay, so that's good. That's a really good question. So I did not meet the kids. I mean, I always knew about them. It was never a secret. His relationship was never a secret. And so when we were first like getting to know each other socially and dating, he was only available certain amounts of time, right? Because of his custody schedule. And so that's a weird thing about dating someone who has partial custody, right? So one weekend, we could go out and, and be single. And the next weekend, I wouldn't see him. I would like travel or do like things with his friends, which was okay, right? Because I was just living my life. And then it was a pretty intentional conversation. It was like he was not going to introduce me to his kids until he was pretty confident that it was a very serious relationship. Now, he was really direct with me about that, and I would have said then that I understood what he was talking about. And I listened, and I did understand the words, but I do want to say that I'd have a completely different understanding of it today. Because, like it's my assertion that this is very hard to understand until you're kind of in it. And that's one of the pain points that people go through. Is like, it's a very whiplashy feeling. It's like, it's very similar to the transition of not being a mom to being a mom. It's like, it's not a secret how hard that is. But the realization of what it's actually like to be a fully responsible person for a totally helpless newborn is gobsmackingly tough. In the beginning, it's like, oh, this is what they meant when they said I wasn't going to sleep. Oh, everybody tells you, but then when you're in it, you're like, oh my God, like this is so that part of it is also true. So he was very outspoken about it and very direct, because adding the kids to the mix is a natural intensifier. The kids get attached to adults sometimes very, very quickly, and it shifted the dynamic completely of what we did together. So I went from being someone who dated another adult, right, to then when the kids were involved, we would do things like go to an amusement park. Like that. I mean, not that you can't go to an amusement park as adults, but like it's like, let's go to the children's museum. I was not going to do that by myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. How old were the kids when you made that
4 and
transition?
8.
4 and 8. Okay. So they were pretty well established in their routine with dad. And you sort of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but maybe like for a little more clarification, like when things started to get more serious, what sort of went through your head and like, oh, okay, now I am going to be a permanent fixture in these kids' lives?
You know what? I should think more about exactly when I had that thought, because I was late to that awareness.
Okay.
I was late to that awareness. My lived, there's those phrases like, when you're too close to the trees, it's hard to see the forest. When you're inside the bottle, it's hard to read the label. I feel like my actual experience of this was very much like I was going from day to day, like living my life. and then would realize like, oh wow, this is a bigger commitment. And so we moved in together in a house, which was a much bigger commitment than I realized. And my general like sort of attitude at this time was like, I'm nice, he's nice, the kids are cute. What could go wrong? This is fun. And then there was a major shift when we moved in together when I was part-time with the kids, which was a major shift and adjustment. But I was able to manage that in a different way then because I didn't have my kids of my own with their dad. And so I could take off for a weekend. I could go out for a day on my own. I was untethered.
Yeah.
And so there was that. And but it is hard to live with other people. It is hard to live with small children, especially if you're not used to it. It wasn't totally smooth sailing. I'm not going to pretend that it was. But then we got married. And then very quickly, I began to add kids to this family. And I love children. I must preface what I'm about to say by saying that I love all of my children. I gotta tell you, adding more kids to any situation does not simplify anything, is my experience. Like even the easiest, calmest, greatest child in the world adds complexity to a situation. And so it just ratcheted up everything. And it completely shifted my experience because where I had been able to, the words we use, detach, right? Where I had been really able to detach from the way some things in my family were happening, the way some things in my house were happening. When I added kids that were mine, I was not able to. So to give some concrete examples, people who are listening who have kids, I'm an easygoing person, but when it came to bedtime routine, I was like a Swiss train engineer. I was like, it is 5:15 and we are doing this, and it is 5:16 and we are doing this. And before I had kids, I really did not have a strong opinion about, what the stepkids were doing on their weekends with their dad, right? Like I would just go into my own room and be like, whatever, call me if you need me. And once I had kids, though, I was not able to do that. I was like, no, the house needs to be quiet when the other kids are going to sleep. I was like, it was a completely different role for me. And that took some help.
Yeah.
That was a thing because there were all these other people. So, not only did I have no idea what diaper rush looked like or, how to tell whether or not a newborn diaper is wet. Like, seriously, who can tell? And, all of the 900 questions that you ask yourself as a brand new parent, I also had this other busy family that was going, that was going on all the time. So, yeah.
Yeah. How much of a role did you play with the other kids? I'm just trying to sort of get a picture of those early days. Like, were you stepmom, dropping off at school, going to functions, or?
So sometimes I'm very, very lucky that we don't have any of the larger issues that can make blended family life overly complicated. So both of my stepkids have two engaged parents, right? So my husband is engaged in their life. Their mom is engaged. She had gotten married before. There was no drama about me joining the family. There was no no incarceration, no substance abuse, none of that stuff that can really be tough in big families. And so I'm very lucky about that. And people don't get divorced because they're best friends and, everything is rosy. So but my husband and his ex have always been communicable between the two of them and highly, highly motivated to be in the lives of their kids. So was I doing things for the stepkids? Sure. Like going to school performances, being there every once in a while. I would be drafted to do some carpool thing. I actually was, when I was home with young kids, this was a point of conflict. So I, like many step parents, I did want to be helpful and I did want to be involved. And I was desperate to be included in the sort of, I'm good at what I do, adult club of the family.
Yeah.
And so when I was home with young kids, at one point there was, hey, can you go pick up the kids from middle school? And I was like, yes. And what I didn't fully understand then is the reality that in a big family, a complicated family. There's so much work that needs to be done that anytime anybody offers to help, it's like, yes, here, you do it all of the time. And my one offer became like slid into maybe this could be Amy's responsibility. And I had to walk that back. I had to be like, oh, okay, stop. Like, I am not a taxi service for everybody in this family. I can't. That's not what I want to do. And at the time, I made that mean a lot more than it really does, because what it actually meant was we have so many people to be ferrying around all the time that anybody who offers to help is welcome to help, please.
Yeah. So yeah, this is also really an interesting perspective for me as well, because I am a stepchild. I have a stepmom who came into my life much later, and like I was 14, so very well established. And I have a stepfather who didn't come into my life until I was well into my 30s. So it's
that's really I talk to people all the time who are stepping in when the kids are teenagers, and I'm sure I shared this with you at some point. My first piece of guidance is to like remember that, think back to yourself as a teenager, because when I was 14, I was not looking for any more adults to happen in my life. And just keep that in mind as you try and build a relationship with these young people. Like, because if you come in and you're like, hey, let me be your mom, you're gonna be like, whoa, hold the phone, because no.
Yeah, like I've got one of those things.
Right. That is, and one of the weird things about that is that even if the actual biological mom is not actually in the picture, that role is still filled. Right? That role is still filled. And I learned this from like adoption and foster parent like resources, was like the academic sort of stuff that I studied with this, even though it vibes very well with my personal view, right? Like when my stepdaughter was like, you're not my mom, I was like, yeah, I know. Yeah, right, that's right. And respect, I use the words honor and respect when I talk about this. That rule is filled, right? That rule is filled. And as a step parent, the way I treated it was that it was like, yeah, that I honor and I know that. And part of my job as an extra adult in this package is to help you protect that relationship. Whether your mom is not here today because she's in another house, or whether she's unable to fill the role of the mom you want because of whatever's going on, or maybe even if a parent is deceased, that's still the parent, right? And so anybody else who comes in is like extra. Sometimes people call it bonus parent because they want to make it like a prize. So yeah.
My stepsister calls my mom bonus mom. Her mom passed away.
There you go.
Yeah. And we were very intentional too with like, again, we were adults entering into this, and we're like, your mother is your mother, and she's still a part of this family and all that stuff. But that's a tangent. And but yeah, it's interesting to me because it's the flip side of the coin for me. It's a perspective that I don't have. Was adding to your family always sort of the intention with your partner?
We negotiated it. Like it was, so it was a very distinct and intentional negotiation. Like, he wanted to marry somebody who wanted more kids. So if I had not wanted kids, I would not have been a candidate, for the open role of life with him. And, he was very specific about only two. So if I had wanted 5 kids, that would have been off the table. And then, funny story, this is very funny. So, or cute, let's say cute. So right after I had my second kid, I was wishy-washy in the way hormonally with cute little babies you can be about should we add more kids to this, right? And my husband, though, he was further along down the line of experience with this. We had a teenager who was pushing our buttons in that, which I was tuned out because I was in babyland. And I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe one more. And he's like, hey, we talked about it 2 and 2. And I was like, I know, but I was sort of giving it a little gentle push. Like, maybe could I persuade you? And he like called and made an appointment with a doctor for a vasectomy, like totally without me. And then called his dad and was like, can you take me to this appointment?
Oh
He was
my gosh.
finished. And I was like, okay. And my girlfriends were like, were you upset about that? I was like, no, because it really truly was the deal. This is not like a surprise. Like, like this is what we talked about. And it was not unclear or anything. But I was like, but it was funny to watch it as I was like, oh, he's not kidding. And
no, he really made that. He made that pretty clear.
Yeah. And it is a good idea. I do think, it's a good idea, I would say, as someone who's old and wise like I am, for people to talk about their goals with how big a family they want at any time. But I do think it's especially important for people who are looking at doing step families and blended families to have that really honest conversation from the get-go. And one of the hard parts about that can be really believing people when they tell you what they want. Because sometimes we want to see things that aren't there. So like if you're dating someone and they're like, well, I don't think I want any more kids, or I'm not sure that I want to get married again because I had this horrible divorce. Sometimes we want to like sort of soften that in our mind and think that it's not going to happen. And if possible, it's really good to be brutally honest with yourself and, really accept people for where they are, because that's a painful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that though too, because it applies in really all aspects of life. Believe people when they're telling you things, even if they're cushioning it.
Yep.
And you're trying to cushion it. Like, yeah,
it is hard, I think, especially in the courtship phase, because, we see what we want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And people, we also, when we're in the courtship phase, we don't lead with our worst features most of the time, right? We're not like, hey, let me tell you how cranky I am if I don't eat, like we show each other the best version of ourselves, and sometimes we show each other what we think they want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And that, when I say that, I don't mean it at all in judgment. I think this is the natural version of courtship. We get dressed up nicely to go on dates, right? And that opens up, though, the potential for the need to really communicate about values and desired futures as we go. Otherwise, you can be moving in two different directions and not realize it.
Yeah, definitely. So you sort of talked about this a little bit when we first started chatting. But as you were making that transition into starting your own family, like having your kids, you had it in your mind sort of, you're like, oh, my partner's been through this, like this will be cool. But what was that like for you? Did you have any sort of preconceived notions about yourself or what motherhood would be like based on your experience?
I think I did. I had a lot of concerns, uncertainty, because I come from a very small family. I don't have a lot of sisters or cousins who had gone through it before. I did have some girlfriends, but I did not. One of the big surprises was how much of a solo job the first, let's say, 6 years of motherhood is, even if you're surrounded by other people. So it is this weird experience where you're never, ever, ever alone.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you are the primary doer of many, many things. And the pressure of that, the relentless, never-ending pressure of that was an eye-opener for me. Standing in my kids' room at 3 a.m, changing a diaper, desperately wishing that there was someone else who was going to swoop in and do it. That was a big thing. So that was a really, really, really big awareness. And then the other thing that is super hard at that phase, and we did have bigger kids, so there was that, is that within a family, so before you have kids and before you're in a family, I had an idea sort of that there was an easier choice when you didn't want to do something, right? That I was like, well, I mean, I thought I was going to be well dressed and show up with kids with matching outfits, and all of these things were going on, right? And the reality was not quite like that. I'm really not sure why I thought I was going to be like the matching outfits, because I've never been that type of person. But the truth is that when there are so many things in a busy family that just actually need to get done. And so I have no math on this, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if it was millions of decisions, which the way I actually end up making the decision is like, I know I don't want to do this. Would never want to do this, but I need it to be done. And so I have to do it, right? I have to do it. And before I lived through that experience, I think I thought that there was another option, which was more like negotiating, hey, this shouldn't be my job. And so there is that choice. And I lay that out there because I do think that there's a sort of an expert level tone of things that people are like, oh, well, sit down and talk about who's going to do these things and how you're going to break up this labor in your house, which is great and fabulous, right? But when the sink is overflowing with dishes and your husband is out at a sporting event with the kids so that he can be there, and you've got 85 things to do, that it's like there's nobody to talk about with. No. Right? It's like the 2-year-old is not going to do the dishes, and so if you want an empty sink and a clean kitchen, the only choice is to actually clean it. Right? And so if you're doing that and telling yourself the story that there should be some other way, you might be making yourself feel crappy when the reality is, that's the way you get it done. And I had a little sign that hung over my sink that said something like, bless this mess, with the idea that it's like, be thankful for the mess because, that means you have this big family and stuff like that. And that is true, right? That is true. I can be thankful for it. But I will also say that F the mess. Like, yes. I don't like the mess.
Yes.
Right? Like, repeating that mantra to myself 200 million times did not make me any happier about the never-ending dishes. One of the lies of adulthood is that there's a point where you don't have to do dishes and don't have to do laundry. I've never had that happen. It's always dishes, always laundry.
That's why they call it the laundry cycle or the dishwasher cycle, because it's
a very good point. I'd never heard that. That's so funny.
Because it's a never-ending cycle.
It never ends. It never, ever, ever ends.
And with kids, it's amplified.
Right. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And highlighting what you just touched on, this is a big thing that we talk about a lot, is the duality.
Yes.
The bless this mess, but also F this mess. Like, yes,
right.
you're thankful for the family that you have and the home that you have and this, that, and the other thing, but you also can be really, really, really frustrated with
just
the
downright
way.
Angry. Just downright angry. And not everybody is like this, but one of the things is that I think that if you do not have a way, if a person does not have a way to safely, effectively vent the frustration and the rage, it does this sort of like transmogrification and just morphs into like horrible stuff, right? Because, it doesn't work to pretend that you love something you don't love. There's not a version of my life where I love cleaning bathrooms. It doesn't exist, right? And if I pretend that way, it doesn't do it. And the two things are actually unrelated. I love my family, right? I am annoyed by the mess that is created with, at one point 6 people, 4 of them pretty young, living all in the same house, which it was like constant, those two things happen all at the same time. And when I was a new mom and new step parent, the mistake I made was directing that rage and that frustration to my partner because he was the only other adult around. And the learning that I needed to do was that I needed a different way to be able to express it constructively, because he has the same thing going on.
Yeah.
Right? He has the same thing going on. And so there's a million different ways to do that, right? Because you should be able to express rage in the direction of your partner, but there are ways to do it together where you're not attacking. And I did not know that at first. In fact, so therapists will tell you use I statements when you're talking to your partner, right?
Yep.
And my early I statements were, I think that you should be doing this. that this is a problem. And I think your kids are messy. And the therapist was like, that's not what we mean by I statements. I was like,
It comes with experience. I mean, it's a lived, learned thing in any relationship, in relationships with your kids, and relationships with your partners. And I say this like I've mastered it. I absolutely have not. I mean, no, you learn as you go. That kind of, though, something that you said sort of helps me transition into one of my next thoughts or my next questions, when you said, like, I think that your kids are messy. And I wonder, was there a dynamic shift in the house once you had your kids? It's like, okay, these are your kids and these are our kids. Or was it like, these are all our kids?
So they are all his kids, and they have always been. And so they've always just kind of been the kids. But there definitely were shifts.
Yeah.
So like almost every divorced person, my husband has some guilt about his role in the relationship. And one of the beliefs I have is that, I'm very against divorce shaming, right? And I'm very against targeting the divorce as the explanation for anything, because it's just a thing and it can't actually, it's a bypass, right? You can blame everything on the divorce, but that doesn't change anything that's actually happening. And so if you do that, you can do that forever and never move through it, is the problem. So he had some thinking going on when we were early together that was, he had such little time with his kids that he didn't want to give them responsibilities when they were at our house.
Okay.
It was a really, really big problem, because the result was that I was living in chaos, right? Because it wasn't like he was cleaning up after them. He was like just letting their mess sit. And so that was a big thing for us. Like I was told by marriage counselors and advisors that it was inappropriate for me to get involved because I wasn't a parent. That's a very common piece of advice, which is like, let the parents parent. And in our house, this came to a showdown where I was like, listen, this is not parenting. This is me saying I should have a say in the standard of living that I'm experiencing, right? I don't actually care who cleans up the toys. I'm not interested in making the rule about whether or not the kids need to clean it up. What I care about is like the condition of the house, generally speaking. And so that's kind of how we worked through it slowly. It was definitely like we had to learn as we go kind of thing, because, that's the only option here. There is no magical download of how to do this. You figure it out as you go. Even if you have a team of advisors, you're still going to be figuring it out as you go. And then it did change when we had other kids. I don't think that it was more complex because the big kids go back and forth between the house, and there were 4 adults involved in their life instead of 2. But it's the same kind of thing. So at one point we had a teenager and toddlers. So my stepdaughter was very interested in arts and crafts, and she's a super creative person. Is a wonderful part of her personality, but she was leaving X-Acto knives out where the kids could get them. And so like I was like cleaning them up and figuring out, and in my mind, right, I was trying to figure out, the question I had in my mind was, we have to figure out a way that she can do this and the small kids are not at risk. Like that was the thought in my head. She came home and saw that I had moved her things and got really, really upset. Like I wasn't there to have a conversation with her, right? And she went to her mom and was like, Amy did this and she cleaned it up and she doesn't want me to do crafts. And just by, miraculous stuff, her mom was like, I don't think that that's why Amy would do that.
Yeah.
Like, let's get a hold of Amy and talk about it. And we had a chance to come together. I was like, no, I want you to be able to do this. But also your little brother and sister are not old enough to know that they can't touch these things. So like we have to really brainstorm how these things can all happen in the same space. And so that's an actual situation where all the different adults were involved and there were some really high emotions. The emotions are really downplayed now when I tell this story, but just try and put a hormonal teenager in there, right?
Well, a hormonal teenager and a new mom. Like,
right,
you've got toddlers.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and she, but, and did the fact that I was a stepmom make it a slightly more complicated? Of course, but could that same story have played out in a family where there was just a big age range? And I think so. I think it could. I think that most of the things that happen in blended families also happen in families where there's no blood. So,
yeah. For sure. I can attest to the fact I have a big age gap between my two kids. My oldest is just about to turn 9 and my youngest just turned 2. And we have the same conversation. Like, you cannot leave your scissors on the craft table. You cannot leave your Legos on the floor.
Oh, I have Legos.
Yeah, she really likes
Legos on the floor. Oh,
yeah. Luckily, they both like magnetiles, which... Yeah, they weren't really a thing when I was a kid, but anyway, off the point. I think what speaks to the strength and dynamic in your situation is that all parties involved were able to communicate and like get the problem solved, which isn't always the case in a lot of blended families.
It's not the case, and most people really don't know how to do this kind of communication. And when I say that, I want to offer that I didn't either.
Yeah.
Right. But it takes practice and leadership. Like, you need somebody to lead you through it, like education, to learn how to have these conversations, and not have them, and actually fight about the things that need fighting about and not the things that aren't, right? So we talked about like I was upset about the mess in the house. Well, we fought about the mess for a long time before I was able to realize that what I really needed to do was talk about how can we shift this so that I get what I need.
Right.
Right. And so, and then it becomes like, because otherwise it's just blaming and fighting and I'm angry and it shouldn't be this way. And there's no, it's a process. It's a process. What is the actual issue here? Is there actually a solution? What would there be that would make it better? Because this is also one of the secrets, unpleasant secrets that nobody talks about in family. Sometimes when I was younger, a couple things. First of all, I thought the adults that were around in my life knew what they were doing. I now realize that nobody ever knows.
No.
Right? It's like the biggest fake out. Like, I think about how much time, no one knows. Anyway, the other thing is that I thought that there would be clear and obvious good and bad choices. And that it would be easy to make them. And so often, there's just not. Like, it's not clear. There's no good choice. And you find yourself and you're like, I'm pissed and I hate the way this is. And I'm really angry and I'm hurt. And also, I don't have a way to change this. Right? There's no way to change it. And there's no superhero around the corner who can sweep in and change it either. And so what are we going to do? What are we going to do?
Yeah, and it's so a lot of what you're describing to me too sounds so much like we use the term now like default parent. You were the default parent, and maybe not necessarily for your stepkids, but you were the default adult in the house.
I was a default adult in our house. It was a decision that was made semi-intentionally by me, given the choices. There's not a great choice for professional women in America with small kids, to tell you the truth, right? Like, school options don't actually line up with work options. As far as I know, there's no 6-figure job that is open between 10 and like 11:30 when kids go to preschool, No. And so I did make the choice. I was like, oh, this vision of my life where I do I hire 3 full-time people to watch my kids while I go back to work, or do I stay home? I made that choice and I did it on purpose, and my husband loved it, right? My husband absolutely loved it. And so I call this the slippery slope, right? Because I did make the choice. We did dive into this, but over time, right, it did become more and more, everything was on my shoulders. And then there hit a point where, the kids do eventually learn how to drink out of their own juice boxes. And then they do eventually age up into not actually needing you as much. And then it's a conversation where it's like, hey, I don't have to do this stuff anymore. Now, my kids are almost all grown, right? And about 2 years ago, everybody was out of town and living their best life. And my husband was like, hey, what are you making for dinner? And I was like, hey, newsflash, you can make your own dinner.
Yeah, imagine that.
Right. I was like, make yourself a sandwich, because like this is not actually, and he was like, what? And it's been a process, like sort of stepping back into that vision of myself, because becoming the default parent is very easy when you have small children around who really, really need you. They really, because that's the thing, right? They cannot do stuff without an adult. They really, really, really need someone. And that's the reality. They more than one person. Like, it's like there's a team of people that it takes to bring all these things together. But then they don't after a while, and you have to be ready to reinvent that I think the words we use today are called recentering. It's like recentering your life back around yourself, because when they're small, that's the joke, right? Like, you put a 2-year-old in the room and everything is about them.
Yes.
And, right? But, a 16-year-old, they don't want everybody looking at them.
They don't want anybody looking at them.
They don't want anybody looking at them. But you have to see what they're doing, right? You're not allowed to look at them, but you have to know and honor everything they're doing. It's the hard part about teenagers.
Yeah. Yes. I'm not there yet. But I'm getting close. I'm in the preteen years. It's hard enough.
It is a funny thing about the teen things, though, is that preteen, like, you're there and it's coming. And it's one of those funny things that it is almost like an overnight thing. It's like all of a sudden something will happen. It's different in every family, but something will happen. You're like, oh, wow, there we are. Here we are. And so my stepdaughter, when she was 13, we had like a family event, and she had like one of those things. Like, it was a thing. It's like, you have to be here. Your grandparents are here. It's a family event. Blah 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 blah. Yeah. And she wanted to do something else, anything else. Have a phone call with her friend, like whatever. Right? She had one of those very typical teen things. You're ruining my life. You hate me. Everything is over. Right? Both of her parents were like, gosh, we don't know what happened. Who is this kid? And I was like, because I was still, I'm like a newbie to the thing. And I was like, what do you mean what happened? She's 13. Like, are you not seeing what I'm seeing? Like, this is, and they were like, what do you mean? And I was like, no, she's 13. This is like normal teen stuff. Do you not remember?
That's so good. You were able to have that like outsider's perspective. Like, yo,
right,
guys.
It's one of the things that can be really nice about the step-parent relationship, is that you do bring a fresh eye, which can be nice. Sometimes, not all the time, but every once in a while. And we have 4 or 5 of those from my family, where it was like I was able, because I did have that slightly outsider perspective. And one of the things I help people with is how to introduce that without looking at your husband and being like, you're doing this wrong,
Yeah. That's a delicate line to tread. I'm sure. Sort of winding the clock back a little bit, you had talked about so let's bring us back to the very, very early days of you becoming, having your baby. And you had said earlier, it's like, you're never alone. You're never actually alone.
Never alone.
But you feel so isolated and alone because you're doing everything. Did you have any sort of support system during that time?
I had a lot of support, actually. Part of that because we did have these other kids. So like, we had help already in the house for helping us clean. I had my parents and my husband's parents, who don't live super nearby, but were close enough. When my daughter was a newborn, I was trying to figure out if she was starving, or because I was nursing, I was trying to could not figure out if she was getting any food, or if the diaper, it was just like beyond, I was totally overwrought. Right? They send you home from the hospital like, congratulations, you're a parent. You're like, does anybody know what to do with this thing?
Exactly.
And I called my dad, and I was crying, and he like came running over, and he went to this is in the early 2000s. So really not a lot of some internet stuff, but not as much. And so like, what I thought I wanted was a book. Like, I had it in my mind that there was this book that was going to answer all of my questions about breastfeeding. So he very diligently went to the bookstore and brought me the book, and sat on the bed next to me, like a little couch bed that we had in the living room, and like rubbed my back while I sat there and cried, like, I don't think she's eating. And he was like, she is. I'm confident, and I'm going to sit here with you till you feel confident about it. So I did have support, right? I did have support. And at the same time, I also, the early days when they do those cluster feedings and like they're a couple weeks old, or a couple months old, and they just decide that they're just going to be up for 24 hours a day, pushing all of your buttons, 3:00 in the morning, do you need, it's like you're by yourself, it's like, unless you're going to make your other parent get up and do it. Also, you're by yourself and you're tired and, yeah.
Yeah, I totally lost my train of thought there. It's because I have a 2-year-old. So
that's right. Yeah, you're tired too. Yeah,
I'm very tired. Yeah, support system. So that's kind of important to note too.
Yes.
We talk a lot about building a community, building a support network. If you don't have one already, you have to create one. You had one, and it was still challenging.
Yes.
So like, for listeners who are listening right now, whether you are step parenting or bioparenting or adoptive parenting or whatever parenting, it's hard, and it feels hard because
it is hard.
It's freaking hard.
Yeah.
Because you can have all the support in the world.
Yeah. That's one of the things I like to tell people. Like, the reason it feels hard is it is hard. It's not to celebrate the hardness of it. It's not like, yay, it's hard. But acknowledging that it's hard is, I think, one of the paths through to the next step. It's like, okay, so this is hard. Now what? Okay, I'm very, very tired. Now what? My second kid had reflux. And so he really, really didn't sleep those first couple months till we got, like, things sorted out. And like, I remember I was sitting outside preschool one time, and I was about to fall asleep on the bench. I hadn't realized, it's like, because there's not a lot of sleep in the beginning. And one of the other moms at the preschool was like, hey, how old is your kid? And I forget what it was. And I told him, she's like, something is wrong. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, no, he should be sleeping more at this point. I was like, oh, well, he has reflux. And she's like, yeah, you need to now go to the doctor. You need to push this, because like, if he's still waking up, he's too uncomfortable. And I was like, oh, you think so? And she's like, I think so. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. But yeah, that it sounds so easy to create the village, the network, the support circle, but it's hard. And I will be honest, I think that it's harder today than it was 20 years ago. And I think that some of the things that were really well established that existed when I had new kids sort of disappeared during lockdown, unfortunately. So like, I was able to, and they are coming back. But people should look for them, ask for them, and push this process along if you're not finding these. I was able to find new mom support groups at the hospitals where I had the baby. So like, there was this amazing nurse, and she had a new baby thing that anybody with a baby under 1 year old could come once a week and sit in these beanbag chairs for an hour every Tuesday morning, I think it was, right? And that kind of stuff, that's how I did that, and so it is harder to find stuff like MOPS, which was Moms of Preschoolers, right? Which has gone through a rebrand because everything totally shifted during lockdown. So it's called different things. And, and so this is awareness and just stating it, not putting blame. Like, so if you're having trouble finding these things, it's because there's not right now as much of it as there was, say, 10 years ago. I think it is coming back, and I think it will come back. But the cycles were broken when we shut everything down. And one of the things that to highlight how this happened is like, sort of like a couple of years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine, and she's like, oh, I'm still PTA president for the middle school. And I was like, why? You don't have any middle schoolers anymore. And she's like, yeah, but there was no like PTA for like 2 years because they were doing remote. And so there was she's like, what I'm doing is rebuilding it, going out and finding people and reintroducing it because it didn't exist. And so that kind of thing happened overall. And so, we need more mommy and me stuff, right? Because that's how you build that circle, is through mommy and me massage, and mommy and me swimming, and mommy and me music and group, and mommy and me playtime, and Gymboree circles, although not Gymboree because do Gymboree, but it is called Germboree for a reason. It's like go on Thursday and have a runny nose on Sunday. They do everything they can to keep it clean. This is not a statement on Gymboree or any shared play space, but it's a thing about bringing small children together. It is like a petri dish.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
I 100% agree. And it's super interesting to hear you. So you are only my second guest we are now into, with this recording, season 4, who has talked about MOPS. And I had never heard of it before.
It has a new name now, actually.
So the last guest that talked about it was probably a year ago.
Yeah.
And it was called MOPS when she was using it.
So let me look at what it's called now. So
we can give an accurate name.
Momco.
Okay.
Momco.
So
yeah, So like anybody who had a preschool kid, sort of aged out.
Yeah.
And so it was a good time to transition. But it is affiliated with churches, which sometimes, so the truth is a lot of stuff for small kids is run through faith-based organizations, right? So like if you're not a faith-based person, you just kind of got to chuck it up and understand that that's where a lot of that stuff is for the first 6 years of their life and go with it. But yeah, so it's groups for preschoolers, moms of preschoolers is what MOPS stood for. And I think it extends up. She's got bigger groups now for bigger kids. But it's really nice because they're organized groups and they'll do playtime and they'll bring in speakers and things like that.
Yeah. And I think it's important to, like when we're saying build your village, like it's important to know where to look.
Yes.
And
that's the reason I mentioned that's where those things are. Exactly.
And you can, a good resource is always your pediatrician. Your pediatrician should have a list of even just those mommy and me groups.
Yes.
We need more and more of the parent support groups, but the swim lessons and the music classes and things like that to sort of bring us back around to what you speak about often and what you are so passionate about. What do you think is one of the most misunderstood things about being a step parent?
What do I think is one of the most? So one of the big challenges of being a step parent is, the word people use for it is stigma, which is true, right? Mm-hmm. There is an enormous, so there's a misunderstanding that it's a modern thing, right? When step parents have been around for forever. And there's a frequent assumption that the step parent is a sign of an unhealthy, dysfunctional family. And that is almost always not the case, which is really interesting. So the wicked stepmom is the trope. That's the character that everybody knows. That's the thing that everybody's afraid about being. And that's the thing that everybody affiliates with it. I've been married to my husband over 25 years. And last year, so within the last calendar year, we were at a social event where a person made an assumption and said it out loud using her grown-up voice in public that I had been his mistress and had broken up his original marriage. This is the first time we met this person.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And this kind of stuff happens all the time. People make this kind of assumption. Sometimes this person said it out loud, and we were able to confront it. A lot of people don't. And so there is this reality of the fact that you are moving through the world and this is always true. This is one of the challenges of living in a social community, right? People are making assumptions of you and drawing conclusions about your life without actually knowing you, right? Uh-huh. And so as a step parent, if you also have a version of that talk going on in your head, it's even worse. It's even worse. So it's that alignment of dropping any, being willing to drop any pretext of the illusions you had about what your family is, or that there's a right way to put a family together, right? Uh-huh. So if you were trying to be a stepmom, but you think that a good family only looks like first mom and first dad, that's a hard thing to make it line up because you don't fit in that picture. And so that's kind of the thing that is misunderstood about it, is that, that sort of thing. There's feedback from other people that's real. There's your perception of what you think people are thinking. And then there's the story you're telling yourself that is also causing those problems. And so bringing it all together so that you can build a family that you love and is in alignment with what you want to do is the work that it takes to be happy in it. We talked about blaming divorce early, which is a thing I'm against. But the other thing I talk a lot about that I think is a bigger framework that I think is a really powerful shift is the idea that your happiness is not as connected to the way your family is constructed as you might think it is. So if you have a step parent, you can still be happy, right? If you're divorced, you can still be happy. Like, we know people who are divorced who are happy and people who are divorced who are miserable. We know people who are single who are happy and people who are single who are miserable. We know people who are married who are happy, married who are miserable. These things are just not always one-to-one connected. And so, but think about all the times we blame how we're feeling about ourselves on whether we're married by the time we're 30, whether we have kids by the time we're this age, whether, we get a divorce, whether we're widowed. Like, these are things that we can blame because they're arbitrary and they're not real. And so it's a perfect target. It can't talk back. You can have that argument with yourself all day long. You can be like, the reason I'm unhappy is because I'm a step parent. It's not possible to be happy as a step parent. It's just an impossible situation. And there's no off-ramp there. That's a circular argument that there's no solution. And so the process of figuring out what you're going to do and how you can be happier, contenter, fulfiller is partly saying, oh, well, you know what? Maybe it's not as connected to that as I thought it was.
Yeah. That was so much good information in such a concise little nutshell. It's almost like you talk about this all the time.
I do a lot of talking about it, but it started with you're doing these podcasts and you're talking about this, and it started with I had this life experience. I had my own lived experience. I had all these things. I had, it's a rule that when you get to midlife, you learn how to be a coach on something, right? So I had all these coaching certificates, and then it was the work of figuring out, did I actually have something that would help people, and what were the things that I did that may have made a difference, and then talking about it over and over again and looking at things that, did or didn't work. And I did as much as anybody does, and there's no way to avoid it, looking for what is the magic sauce that will change this? What's the one thing? What's the best color for my website? What shoes do I need to buy my stepkids so that they'll like me? What's the way to connect? I did a lot of that. And it's important to do all of those things. But the bigger shift was when I was like, what do I want my life to look like? What do I want my home to feel like? What kind of family do I want to make? And what pieces do I have and what I don't have? And letting all the other stuff drift away with a very big dose of be careful who you ask for information. And the reason I say that is that there are so many people in the parenting space who offer advice, really, really well-worded advice, and they may never have been parents.
Right.
They have degrees from very fancy places, or if they're parents, they may never have been moms, right? Or if they're moms, they may never have been divorced moms. And we do devalue and dismiss the quality of information that comes from people who have lived experience, right? So we tend to want to ask teachers and doctors and therapists, right? And they can be really, really helpful. This is not saying that they cannot be really helpful, but if they don't have actual experience, they may not have the answers that you need. Once upon a time, I asked a pediatrician how to give a baby medicine, and they gave me a suggestion, which I blocked from my memory because it did not work, and the medicine ended up all over the kitchen. And the pharmacist would not refill the prescription. I had to go back and get a new one to do it. And when I did, I talked to the nurse and I was like, hey, I asked her how to do this and give it to the baby and it didn't work. And she was like, oh, what did they tell you? And I told her, and she laughed hilariously because she was like, yeah, they are a good doctor, but they don't actually have any kids. They probably never actually tried this. And then she gave me a different solution. And I had just trusted that because they were a doctor, they knew. And they do know lots of things. They just didn't know that thing. And so I call this the hill I might die on, which is that no matter how important a person appears from the outside, ask what their experience is. Ask what their experience is. Like, if you have, any experience, if you have a special needs kid and, you're looking for advice, people who know nothing will give you advice.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you avoid that is you say, hey, did you try this? What happened when you tried it? And if they're like, oh, well, I read a magazine online or I saw a movie one time about this, then you're like, thank you. Next.
You just told me everything I need to know.
Right, exactly. Drive through, please.
Yes. You have made my job as a host so easy. Like all of my bullet points, you've hit them all on your own. And usually I do a wrap-up question, but you literally just answered my wrap-up question without me having to ask it, and it was multifaceted. So usually what I'll say is like, what do you want others to take away, or what do you hope that other people know? I'll still give you that opportunity. I feel like you just did an incredibly beautiful job of summing up so much of what you feel about this experience. But I guess, yeah, if there was one thing, if you had to pick one little nugget for listeners to walk away with, what would you hope that would be?
So I think we've talked a lot about how hard things are, and they are. But one of the tricks of making it through the hard stuff is learning to pay attention to the stuff that goes well. And in motherhood, especially early motherhood, these are like flashes. This is, a moment of calm with a kid snuggling with you on the couch before you get a knee to the belly. Kiss from a toddler that's only slightly sticky, and, but paying attention to those teeny tiny flashes of goodness, because it's hard, right? It's hard to train yourself, especially, and this is hardest for high functioning, driven people who are achievers, because we're very quick to move on to the real thing, and we have a very high standard of what we expect from ourselves and from others. And so part of the way of feeling good about ourselves as we move through these tough seasons of life, these very demanding seasons of life, is learning to pay attention to those really nice moments. And they're short. They're very, very short.
Yeah. We call them glimmers.
Yeah. The glimmer for me is more like I think of glimmer as forward looking. It's like, oh, this is going to be okay. But like the little flash of that was nice, and I was the queen of today was horrible. And as a coach, I remember one time I was coaching somebody and she was like, this kid cries all day long, and she was distraught. And I was like, all right, is for real all day long? Because it's possible, right? It could definitely happen. And let's go through, like, what did you do today? Did you really cry all day long? And then, the truth is, cried a lot. It was really, really hard, but there were other things in there. And it's like learning to pick those out and use them as footholds is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing your insight, for sharing your lived experience. Where can my listeners find you if they want to learn more about you?
Okay, so my name is Amy, and the name of my company is Amy Says So. If you're a step parent, I have a step parent specific website, which I call Stepparent Success School. And you can find coaching, and I have a standalone course there. And I'm in the process of launching a more general course, which I call Imperfect Adulting, and the art of imperfect adulting. So those are the 3 places people can find me. I am on the socials, but I'm not really on the socials. Like there's more like a yellow pages of how to get to those websites.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. And we will be sure to link all of your websites and all of your stuff in the show notes. But yeah, thank you. This has been really cool for me on a personal level to sort of get a different perspective on what my step parents may have experienced. And I think it's a really, really important topic that needs to be talked about because you guys are parents too.
That's right.
We're going through this life with us, and we are all going through this life together. So thank you for sharing your story with me.
Thank you for having me as a guest. I've enjoyed it.
Amy, thank you for sharing your story with me. This is a perspective that I truly hadn't thought to explore prior to meeting you, but one that should be talked about so much more. I appreciated your insight and the connection it will create with other step parents who may feel alone in their journey. but I also really benefited from hearing your perspective coming from my own experience as a stepchild. Listeners, be sure to check the show notes in order to learn more about the resources Amy has to offer. You can keep up with us on Quiet Connection by following us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at Quiet Connection Podcast. You can help our community grow by leaving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and consider sharing our episodes on social media. To share your personal journey, you can contact us through our website at quietconnectionpodcast.com or by email at quietconnectionppmh@gmail.com. Join us next time when another story is told and you realize you are not alone. I see you.